All right, everyone. It looks like we're at just about time. So we're going to get started. Let me just welcome everyone to today's webinar. This is 5 intranet myths debunked. Really excited about this webinar today. It's one of our more popular topics at the different seminars and events that we run and attend all over the world. So I'm excited to share it with you on today's webinar. My name is Daren Jennings, and I am with Interact, and I've been working in the internal communication space for the better part of a decade and help run some of our North American operations. And this is a really fun topic today. We're going to keep it relatively light. I think you're going to get a lot out of this webinar. Before we jump into it, however, I want to just start with a couple of housekeeping items. For today's session, we are using the GoToWebinar interface. So if you have questions, we do want to make sure to keep this collaborative. We are actually in the collaboration business. So if you have questions, please do use the chat box in the GoToWebinar toolbar, which will appear on the right side of most of your screens. If I don't get to all of your questions today, we'll make sure to get in touch afterwards so we can close the loop on any questions that you might have. But hopefully we'll have time to get to everybody today. Okay, great. Well, let's get started. I always like to start with this concept of fact versus opinion, of data versus surveys. And I think in the internal communication space, a lot of us really do rely on surveys to help guide our communication strategy. And they can really be a useful tool. I think we recognize that, certainly with some of the big surveys that come out periodically that are industry relevant from Gartner and from Forrester and Gallup, these employee engagement surveys. And they can be really useful to provide some good initial insight. The only problem with surveys is they're only a partial view into what's actually going on. And primarily this is because this is an expression of opinion or what people think is going to happen. And so surveys inherently are somewhat incomplete. Data, on the other hand, is hard evidence. And for the comms professional, using communications tools as a way to drive the business strategy forward, data can provide some additional insight into what tools are having the greatest impact on the organization. How do different departments change their behavior or consume content differently, and how can we do that? What types of content is actually eliciting the greatest number of responses from us? It's a lot of those lagging indicators or hard evidence that we're actually seeing through data that can help point us in the right direction and provide some additional insights to us. Unfortunately, for the intranet professional or the internal comms professional, we were always reliant on surveys because there just really wasn't a way to get access to the data until now. So to illustrate the point, though, between facts and surveys, I'm going to ask the people using the webinar today to just indicate whether or not you've ever heard of this old adage about don't eat your Halloween candy before your parents check it. I'll just give you guys a couple of minutes now to start voting. Okay, I'm starting to see them coming in. Just use the chat box. Thank you. I figured this was a useful analogy because we're starting in September now, school's back, so we're going to be coming into Halloween soon, and some of the parents online are probably thinking about this already. Okay, great. As anticipated, everybody has at least heard of this expression. Most of you probably end up doing it. I'm a parent as well. I've got 2 small kids, and we definitely check our kids' Halloween candy. And it makes sense, right? The survey supports the fact that this is something that we should probably be doing because 100% of us think it's a good idea to check our kids' Halloween candy for safety. So the survey says that this is absolutely a great thing to do. The only problem is, in reality, there's not been a single documented incident where a child has gotten sick or injured from eating Halloween candy that was intentionally tainted. This was some analysis that was conducted through a great book by a guy named Daren Jennings, who was a Jeopardy star. I loved hearing the story. He looked at this from records back to 1951 through this year, and not a single case was ever documented. So the survey supports the fact that we should be checking our kids' Halloween candy, but the data says the risk is actually pretty much nil. So we're all spending our time and preventing our kids from eating their candy before we go through it with a microscope the night of Halloween, and maybe we shouldn't be doing it. Now, I'm not sure if I'd be the person to risk it, but it certainly illustrates the point that the data and the surveys aren't always aligned. So let's keep that in mind as we go through some of these myths. Now, with Interact, we are an intranet company. Some of you may have heard of us. We have been delivering intranets exclusively in this space since 2003. And we really have, since that time, dedicated a large part of our business to helping our organizations get the most out of their intranet by crunching that data. And we used to use surveys ourselves a lot to help guide our own product roadmap and our own strategy to help our customers get the most out of their Interact service. But we realized that we actually had access to the data. And using our system, which is called telemetry, we realized that we have data points from over 1.1 million employees from around the globe. And these 1.1 million people are doing over 100 million activities, and they're spread across over 850 organizations all across Europe, North America, all of the continents really, except for Antarctica. 850 organizations, and our customer base is very diverse, and it represents a wide range of industries, a wide range of seniority, and accessing it from a multitude of devices. So we realized that not only did we have the data, but the data set was very large and very diverse. It was a nice sample. So what we wanted to do was crunch this data and see whether some common intranet practices could stand up to the scrutiny of data analysis after the fact. So we kind of put our own surveys up to the test. And what came out of that was some very interesting things. So there are some examples of some of the data points that we do analyze at Interact as part of our service. And one of them is the benchmarking of KPIs across all intranets. So customers of Interact can actually share their data anonymously, of course, with us, and we can feed that information back to them to see how their intranet statistics stack up to other similar type organizations. And we're really helping people understand some of those KPIs that are really going to have a major impact on their organization. So certain things like usage statistics and logins and so forth, that can be helpful, but some other things might be more helpful and more insightful. Things like, what is the quality of the content that I'm publishing? How likely are my employees to find that content? What are some of our most popular discussion forums? What blog activity are we doing on the intranet that is having an impact on overall awareness and engagement? We're going to talk about some of these when we debunk these myths. Okay, so without further ado, you understand a little bit about how Interact approaches data analysis. And we know that surveys can be a useful tool, but they're probably incomplete. So what are those top 5 myths that we're able to debunk? Let's start with number 1. This is an oldie but goodie. This is an old school marketer's moment. The best time to deliver internal communications is Tuesday at 2 p.m. Feel free to go ahead and drop in the chat window if you've heard this before or if you're still doing this at all. Remember, it's anonymous. We're not going to pick on anybody. Okay, I'm starting to see some come in, so feel free to raise your hands. Yeah, this is definitely one that I think a lot of companies have started to realize we don't need to worry about anymore. This is probably harkens back from an analog day where you didn't have access to tools digitally. But at a time now when information is accessible from anywhere on any device, is this still relevant? Especially when we have a lot of different teams that might be working flexible hours across multiple locations in different time zones. Do we still need to stick to this? Well, the fact is, you don't. You can publish with freedom. So what we did at Interact is we analyzed publishing times across all of the intranets, and we started to break them down by the day. Now you can see that Tuesday is still a very popular day of the week to publish content, and it's spread out pretty evenly throughout the week. So there might be a few people that are sticking to this adage where you've got Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday pretty much evenly split. Monday a little higher. Friday certainly drops off. One thing I really thought was interesting was that 4% of content is published outside of those normal Monday to Friday business days, which I thought was very, very interesting. So definitely it's open season now, Monday to Friday, to publish content. I wouldn't necessarily recommend going through and publishing it on Saturdays and Sundays, as it may likely to get missed, but news should be reported as it happens, and encourage those people, if you are still sticking to this, to not wait. If it's a Tuesday at 3 p.m., don't wait a week to publish the content. Go ahead and publish it. It's still going to be consumed. So we want to look a step further. So the first question was the day of the week. The next one is, should we wait until 2 o'clock in the afternoon to publish our content? So we did an analysis on this bell curve if you see when some publishing times are taking place. And we have on the x-axis, we have the publishing times, and on the y-axis, we have the percentage of content which is being published. And again, this is aggregated across millions of data points. And we see that from 1 to 2 p.m., 9.2% of all content is published. So it's still a popular slot. It's at the top of that bell curve there. But if you take a look at the total working hours, we've isolated these between 8 a.m. and about 5 p.m., we see that this is definitely the top of the bell curve when we're publishing that content, but it's not complete. I mean, take a look at those ones that are outside of that open area, the shaded parts. We find that almost 1 in 4 bits of content are actually being posted outside of those normal business hours. So 75% of your content is published during normal business hours, but the rest is published either very, very early in the morning, you've got some early risers, or very late at night. And this is a reflection, I think, of how people are starting to work. You have some telecommuters, you have people that are working flexible hours, it might be working parents and have to be at home for their children in the afternoon. Who knows? But the point is, content is being published as it happens. So please feel free to publish outside of those Tuesday 2 p.m. Now, of course, this is an incomplete analysis if we didn't also look at the consumption of that content. So you might be saying, well, sure, you're publishing the content, but when are people most likely to view it? This is what is very interesting. So looking at some page views data within Interact, we see a nice split during the week. Monday through Friday is pretty much even when it comes to actually consuming content on a daily basis. But what I found really interesting was that big spike on Sunday afternoon of 4%. Now, it's still nothing compared to something like Tuesday, for example, which still is the leading time of day to be, or day of the week to be viewing content. But you had 6% of people that are viewing content outside of that Monday to Friday work schedule, and a big chunk right on Sunday. So I'm looking at this and seeing this is probably a result of people maybe prepping for work, sitting at home. Maybe they're sat in front of their television on Sunday night, or their organization has adopted a mobile-first approach, and they have some mobile users that are accessing it on Sunday night getting ready for work. So that's a very popular thing. That's really encouraging, I think. So keep in mind, when you're publishing content, publish with freedom. Publish any time during the week and any time of day. Your consumers, meaning your employees, are likely to be looking at that content. Okay. Let's take a look at the second myth, which is hosting won't impact employee contribution. And this one goes back to a debate that is being taking place right now through a lot of different IT departments, which is whether or not we choose to adopt the cloud or stay in-house on our own servers. And there's a lot of debate around this. I think we've kind of seen the tide has turned where most organizations are adopting the cloud, at least in part. But we were interested at Interact to see whether or not hosting impacted employee contribution. So this is not just consumption of content, this is actually participating in these discussions. And what we've found that a lot of organizations, by shifting to an OpEx mentality and going with a subscription model in the cloud, they're really seeing some impacts and some positive impacts about where their site was hosted and how it impacted. So the fact is, cloud intranets see a much greater activity. So if you now analyze the number of employee-generated content pieces for on-premise intranets, we find that of all the content that's being published, about 15% of that content is user-generated content, so 15.5%. When you analyze that on cloud intranets, it nearly doubles. You literally get 31.1% of employees generating content on cloud intranets. So this is a massive change. So if you're the type of organization that wants to use the intranet as a collaboration moment rather than just a top-down approach of pushing information to people, cloud intranet is certainly the way to go. So it might be really important to push this when you're having these discussions with various stakeholders within the organization, and certainly IT folks, that cloud is going to drive collaboration. So the questions around this: why is that the case? I mean, the software itself doesn't change depending on where it's hosted. Really, it comes down to ease of access. So we know that cloud sites are much more easily accessed from anywhere because it's a web-based application. You just log in with credentials that your organization set up. And so you're not restricted to core hours, where traditionally on-premise intranets you had to be on the network or VPN'd in order to see that content. Well, that's no longer the case with our cloud intranets. It's also easier to access by using single sign-on technology, so you can actually log into your intranet and it remembers who you are. You can log into your mobile device and it remembers who you are. But it's really all about mobile. What we have found that mobile and tablet users are 8 times more likely to generate content in cloud sites compared to on-premise. And this really comes down to the ease of access. So we know that it's easier to access a cloud site when you're outside of network. And if you're enabling some mobile users, either through a mobile app like Interact provides or through just a responsive design, if you want to encourage that collaboration, host it in the cloud and focus on a mobile approach, because you're really going to tap into a lot of that knowledge base that your employees have. So let's take a quick look at some examples. This is a sample of an intranet that Dex Media has been using for some time, and Dex Media run Super Pages, and they've actually just recently undergone a rebranding, so this is likely a bit out of date. But as they transitioned from an analog type business to a digital type business, where they used to publish the yellow pages that would be dropped off at your door, and now focusing on yellowpages.com, they as an organization decided to adopt a digital first employee collaboration type model. And so they have 2,500 employees spread across the US, and they really approached a collaboration first methodology. And what they found was that by pushing people to comment and like and share content across the intranet, they found that as they shifted away from a keeping our employees on mute model to enabling that, that 90% of their employees are actually contributing to content on a monthly basis. So they're blogging, they're writing, they're sharing, they're commenting, they're creating team sites and collaborating within the intranet by focusing on that approach of having a cloud-first intranet that enabled people to access it from a mobile device. So it was a great success story for Dex. All right, this is another one of my favorites. Blogging is an old school collaboration technique. This is something that is interesting because we've heard a lot of times blogging is, people think, well, blogging is kind of old school a little bit. But, if you look at the way we're consuming content in our social lives, outside of work, it's all about immediacy and sharing content right now and timelines and microbloggings. And there is an obsession with doing some of that. And I would argue that microblogging is adding to the noise. There's a time and a place for it. I think it certainly can be useful, but this constant obsession with immediacy and pushing to timelines and share has actually created a lot of noise around all of us in our own lives, on our own social media, but also within work. And blogging can take a minute to be a bit more informal and approach your employees with some useful messaging, certainly if it comes from some leadership, but it's a bit deeper. So it may not be that full, long, in-depth article or a transcript of the all-hands meeting, but it might just be a recap and something that is important to what's going on from the leadership perspective of the business, and using this as an opportunity to address your employees directly. So we were concerned about this. And what we found is that, in fact, blogs are critical for collaboration. So what you're looking at now is a screenshot of a typical page, what you might see, or a document within Interact. So this is a page that has been authored by a person. Typically, these are more formal in nature. These are your policies, your procedures, static documents that may not be updated that often. And these types of pages don't really encourage collaboration, despite the fact that they may, in fact, have some commenting features and the ability to like and share, as you'll see in the upper right-hand corner of that page. Blogging, on the other hand, is a massive collaboration moment. In fact, if you compare the two, we looked at this through the analysis, was blogs receive 15 times the number of collaboration moments as authored pages do. So again, if you're the type of organization that values its employees and wants to hear their voice and create a two-way communications loop, then encourage people within the business to adopt blogging. 15 times more collaboration points. So notice on the screenshot you have a lot of comments, a lot of likes, and a lot of shares against these blogs, probably because of the fact that they are designed to be a bit more informal and request some feedback. So again, think about this very heavily from an organizational perspective about how you can get more of your executives, some champions, people throughout the business, regardless of where they are in seniority, to consider adopting blogging as a primary communications technique to update the company on what they've been working on. It's really going to have a big impact on collaboration. Now, here's the question. We looked at this and we were so shocked by the 15 times collaboration from blogging that we really wanted to dig into the data a bit further and understanding what type of blog is actually going to drive the most engagement. So we broke them down into a handful of categories. The first was general blogs, which would get about 8% of the collaboration moments. Then you get a slight uplift when they're top-down blogs asking for a response. So this might be the CEO or executive of a company who writes a quick update and then asks people to publish. So you get a little bit of an uplift there. It's kind of nice because they're actively asking for a response. It may not get as much collaboration because it's a bit intimidating to respond to something like that. Then the next is an idea-focused blog, and this is getting a bit more attention because this is where people might be saying, hey, here's an idea I have to improve our business, or here's how we can increase our market share, or here's how we can become more efficient. And people can chime in and say, yes, I agree with that, or have you thought about this? So it's naturally getting a bit more collaboration moments. The next one, when they're just kind of regular blogs from team members on actual results. So this is when you have your intranet champions. And this speaks to, I think, having the ability to have a bit more of a grassroots approach to blogging, not just restricting it to executives. Now, this is when they might be reporting periodically. You have a marketing manager who's updating people on some different marketing successes and so on, and they're recognizing people. But with the next two categories, we found overwhelmingly had the biggest number of blog content that were causing or eliciting some feedback. And that was changes to the organization or team. Pretty standard. If you've got a shake-up within the business or you're promoting some people and you want to blog about it, 27% of all of those collaboration moments came from those types of blogs. So that was very interesting. But most importantly, almost a third of all collaboration moments from blogging came when it was an employee recognition moment when linked to a business benefit or a change they have made. So, for example, you have an organization where you want to increase your market share, and therefore you're adopting a new marketing strategy and you're pushing digital presence in some new markets. And your VP of marketing wants to come in and recognize all the people that contributed to that success, pointing out to how that success is impacting the business and making that a public recognition moment. That's the type of thing that really encourages people to provide that feedback, offer their congratulations, share that with other team members. And think about it, it makes sense. This is something that's a really big deal to the organization. And oftentimes those successes are locked away in those departmental meetings or in an email congratulations. Bringing that type of commentary public and allowing people to comment against it really is the type of thing that breaks down those barriers and makes sure that engagement is shared across the business. Very, very interesting topic. Also, keep in mind that social has a validation technique. It's not just about blogging for blogging's sake. We know that employees who blog for the first time are much more likely to blog again if their comment was commented against, liked, or shared. And so that's a collaboration, a bit of a validation technique, rather. So think about this. If a blog is commented on, what we found is that the author is 80% more likely to publish again compared to someone who did not receive any comments on their blog. So please encourage people to come in and comment on these types of things. Not only are you going to capture some valuable insights, but you're going to encourage a culture of blogging again because people want to feel like they're being heard. And interestingly enough, if a blog just receives a like, a single click like you've all seen on Facebook, that person is 83% more likely to come back and blog again. Again, because it's that validation technique. They want to feel like they're being agreed with, or at least that their voices are being heard. So it's not enough just to use blogging as a way of pushing content, that top-down communication. Encourage people to have that feedback, comment against it, and make that a part of your organizational culture, and you'll start to see a proliferation of blogging that really does add a big value to the organization. Okay, I think we're doing great here on this one. So let's move on to the next myth. This one's my absolute favorite and usually gets a lot of raised eyebrows when we do this presentation in person. And certainly I'm expecting some questions on this later. But this is about keeping your employees on mute, as we say at Interact. Or the idea, the flip side is social posts are just too risky. Is there some sort of a moderation or an approval process that we can have before going live? So the idea is before an employee is allowed to comment against something, you have to vet that comment, sanitize it, approve it for publishing, and then allow it to go live. And I understand that this is a risk that a lot of organizations perceive to be the case. So we were curious about whether that risk was actually justified. So we wanted to take a look at all the social posts across our platform and what percentage of those posts were actually deleted. So we've had over 1.1 million comments on these 1.1 million users. So out of that, 1.1 million comments were actually published on discussion forums, comments against blogs, comments against pages, team timeline posts, and what the the metric that we looked at was if those social posts were deleted. So of course with an interact, you can go back and change a post or you can delete a post. So we thought, well, if the post was deleted, it's most likely to be offensive. We found that a very small percentage of social posts were actually deleted. In fact, less than 0.5%. So the overwhelming majority of these posts, there was no violation at all. There was no problem that happened. The company was happy to address those posts even if the information was accurate. However, I do recognize that it only takes one post to wreak a lot of havoc. So we dug a little bit deeper. And we approached some of those customers, and we did use a survey. In full disclosure, we did use a survey, and we were curious, and we said, listen, of those posts that were deleted, can you categorize them for certain reasons of deletion? So we said, look, if you're not really sure, there's an unknown. If they deleted it because the information was incorrect, or the information could be found elsewhere, or if the user thought better of it and maybe deleted that comment, or if it was an actual violation of your acceptable use policy or your governance. And what we found, what we considered a violation, by the way, would be things that were like bad language, inappropriate unprofessional information, a personal attack, maybe they're sharing protected content that shouldn't be. There's a lot of things around intellectual property. And surprisingly, not a single instance came up. What we found from more than 1 million posts, astonishingly, was that only 4 of these were categorized. I went a little ahead of myself. Were categorized as being a violation. And we actually approached this organization that had reported these, and it turns out it really wasn't anything in particular bad, but it was just some trash talk that was going on around a sporting event that was coming up that just wasn't appropriate. But the result of this, that there weren't any major risks to the organizations after over 1 million different social activities across Interact. So none of these items resulted in an employee termination. None of these led to a company lawsuit. None of them led to a loss of intellectual property or cases of corporate espionage. So the reverse of this really should be not what do we stand to lose if we allow our employees to post socially, but what do we stand to lose if we continue to keep them on mute? So what's the worst going to happen? This was a great Twitter meltdown that happened. It's been a couple years now, but I think it really makes some very interesting discussion. So this was an organization in Europe, I believe, that was having some tough times, and the organization was going to shut its doors, and they did not have an internal communication strategy. They did not have a forum for employees to make their voices heard. So the employees, disgruntled as they were that they were losing their jobs, took to Twitter and hacked the company's Twitter account and decided to tweet for everyone to hear what's been going on within their organization. So this went out to all of their followers. 62,000 people, as you can see up on the top there, were able to see that this organization was undergoing a complete meltdown. So had this business actually had an internal communication strategy and had their executives at the time made some better decisions about allowing their employees' voices to be heard, they might have not gone down in flames like they did on Twitter, as you can see. So keeping in mind that managing some risk with internal communications can actually result in some external communication exposure if people don't feel that they have a voice to be heard. Hopefully some of you remember this guy. This was the Bat Kid from San Francisco a couple of years ago. This was a great story that caught headlines all over the world, and partially it's because he's a cute kid, but this is really because of the great work by Make-A-Wish Foundation, which is an Interact customer, and they have a great story when it comes to allowing social collaboration. And of course, Make-A-Wish, if you're not familiar with them, their mission is simple. They really just want to grant wishes for children with serious illnesses. And everything that they do, including their intranet, has that goal in mind. So it's a very singular focus as an organization is to grant wishes to sick kids. And they want to run that through their entire culture of their business, including the intranet. And so they saw their intranet as an absolutely critical platform to helping achieve that mission. So here's what happened with Make-A-Wish. Now, before Make-A-Wish had an intranet, they didn't really have any way of sharing information across their organization. We're talking about 650 offices all over the country. We're talking about thousands of people, and they didn't have a place to share content. Everything was completely locked away in silos, and there was some really great information. So they decided to take the approach that we want to use discussion forums to encourage our wish makers to share ideas and best practices that allow us to become more efficient and grant better, more wishes. And the feedback was tremendous. They have 91% of over 2,200 wishmakers around the country contributing on a monthly basis some victories, maybe some setbacks, ideas, and best practices. And what they found is that they were able to create so much efficiency with these discussion forums and sharing ideas back and forth that they are actually able to create more wishes and better wishes for more kids around the world. So it's really helping them achieve their mission. This isn't just about social for its own sake. This is about driving a company's purpose forward by tapping into the collective knowledge of your organization and giving these people a forum to make their voices heard. So tremendous victory for Make-A-Wish. So hopefully we've made the point that if you keep your employees on mute, there's not risk to the business as much as you might think. And in fact, there's a greater risk in terms of what are you not getting out of your employees and potentially what are you risking to the organization. Backed up by data. So very interesting. All right, we're coming into our fifth and final myth. And this is a quick one. And this is really just intelligent content suggestion is just a gimmick. So for those of you who have heard of Interact before, ours is the intelligent intranet. So what we wanted to analyze was whether or not the intelligence features built within the Interact product have an impact on employee collaboration. And the fact is that what we found was really justified and validated, that intelligent content massively drives usage. And intelligent content can be an example of what you're looking at right here with an Interact suggests box on a timeline or suggests content to a user based on their browsing history. So we analyzed all of the intranets that had intelligent content features either turned on or turned off, because of course with a lot of platforms, of course you can turn off certain features. And what we found, we wanted to see how many people were actually logging in and on a daily basis, or how many days a month were people actually logging in, excuse me. So what we found that some organizations that have used Interact but chosen not to go with any of the collaboration features, they get an average of 40% of the working days a month, or 8 working days a month, which is probably not great when it comes to that internet usage. Now, if they use the concept of a best bet, which is very much like a sponsored link within the search results, driving those critical results to the top of the page, very much like a Google sponsored link, you had a big jump. You had a lot more credibility and relevance with the search, so people were more likely to come back. So you saw that usage jumped to 11 working days a month, or just over half. Now, if they used suggested content within a timeline, we see a little bit of an increase there again, 12 working days a month. Or if you use suggested content against other pages, and this is very much like you might see on Amazon, where if you are looking at a certain product, Amazon might suggest a similar product or a complementary one. Interact works in much the same way. So if you have suggested content against pages uncovering information they may not know existed, we see additional relevance and engagement where usage spiked again. But if they use all three, best bets, suggested content, and suggested content in pages, we found that the average company was seeing 75% of the working month people were coming in and logging to the intranet, so 15 days a working month. So intelligent content was a massive driver for consistent engagement usage across the intranet. All right, those are our 5 myths, and we've got a little bit of time left today. I'm sorry I went a bit long. A handful of questions have been coming through, so I think I'm only going to have time for maybe 2 or 3. Let's see if we can go. I'm going to pick these ones out, the first ones that came through. So this is an interesting question. So the first question is, how do you convince the company to allow social commentary? So I think what you're getting at here is social collaboration, and how do you enable some of those social posts? I suppose that's a difficult question to answer. I mean, what we recommend at Interact is if you've never adopted any types of collaboration features like commenting or liking or sharing or blogs, is to start slow. With Interact, certainly, or any platform that you're considering, you should have the ability to start slow and kind of dip your toe into the water, where you might want to open up maybe just one discussion forum, and it could be pretty vanilla. Maybe it's related to lunch ideas or something like that. But you can start slow, and you have some discussion forums that maybe include a top 10 FAQ section. So it could be related to HR, or it could be related to IT, like a top 10 IT FAQ in a discussion forum. And it could be things like common problems, like I can't print or I can't access email on my mobile device, and allow people to come in and view these and maybe even comment against them in a kind of a safe way. And then you might introduce additional features like comments or blogging down the road. So I feel like you can start slow. I would also say oftentimes our employees are reticent to comment or to contribute to information if they don't feel like it's a safe place. And it helps if you have some leadership to lead by example. So if they come out and start blogging, if they comment on posts, if they share things, you're going to see that lead by example, and that's going to trickle down to the organization. So if you can get your executive involved, I'd say that's another great way to do it, provided you have their support. Oftentimes they're the ones you need to convince, and I get that. We can certainly talk further about that. And the only other bit I would say is have an acceptable use policy in place, publish it on the intranet so people understand what's expected of them, so that you don't get into a situation where people are having inappropriate discussions within it. I mean, typically those issues are mitigated anyway within Interact because the person's name and contact information is there, but it's important that people know what the rules are ahead of time. So make it very clear, and most of the time the people that we work with are professionals and know what's expected of them and what they should and should not say. But I would say start slow, have your executives lead by example, have an acceptable use policy, and monitor and iterate and see how it changes over time. That's a great way to get started. All right, let's go to one more question. Let's see here. This one says, do you see a difference with content consumption depending on device? Okay, so I think you're asking here, are mobile users more likely to view content during different hours? Okay. The answer is yes, definitely. Within the Interact telemetry suite, there is the ability to actually see login history reports by device and browser. So you can actually see when people are logging in and from what device. So pretty naturally, we see a big spike at kind of the start of the day from a desktop computer, and very naturally we'll see a bigger spike or a greater proportion of mobile device access outside of those core business hours. What we do see, interestingly enough, is that organizations are increasingly seeing collaboration moments of liking and sharing and commenting from a mobile device because people are consuming that content. Maybe they're on their commute, they're sat in a train somewhere or on a bus, or they're sat on their couch at night, and this is where they kind of consume content from the internet. So definitely see a major difference between how people are engaging with content from a mobile device. So think about that if you haven't had a whole lot of a mobile strategy yet. So very good question. Okay, we've got time for one more. Again, this is about social. Interesting. So this is related to the question on should we filter our employees' comments. It says, how long should it take to get social started on our intranet? It depends. There's no answer on it. We do say you should start slow, like I recommended, if it's something that you haven't done. But very often this is a continuum. This is an ongoing thing that you should be looking at. Very recently, we actually noted through the same analysis on telemetry that our approach to how organizations mix the type of content that they publish was actually wrong. So we started out with the notion that almost all content should be a formal page, an authored page. And because of the information we saw related to blogging and how collaborative they truly were, we're now changing our approach and recommending organizations adopt more blogging early on and then continue to adopt it. So we're looking at this like a continuum, and we're suggesting that organizations start kind of slow, but look at this as an ongoing basis. And if you're an organization that's never used any type of social collaborative features internally, you might have a very small percentage of your internet activities being collaborative or social, and you kind of slowly grow into them over time. And we recommend having a strategy around doing that, one that's consistent with your culture and one that's consistent with your governance. But there is no straight answer in terms of how long it takes to get started. It just depends on your business, but it's important that you have some proper guidance to understand how social can impact your organization and how you should approach that. So hopefully that helps. Okay, well, that's all the time we have for today. I do appreciate everyone's time for joining the 5 Internet Myths Debunked. Hopefully you found some value in this and you were able to take this back to your organization. Of course, if anyone has any questions or wants to learn more about Interact, please do feel free to get in touch through the normal channels. And if we didn't get to your question today, I do apologize. We'll certainly have someone follow up with you shortly to respond to those. Again, thank you all for attending today. I really appreciate your time, and enjoy the rest of your day.